Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This week, we have a stack of sources that they really synthesize a stark picture of global fragility.
It's not just one crisis, is it?
No, not at all. We're seeing a series of pressure points hitting all at once. We have diplomacy that's buckling, military tech that is, hyper-accelerating.
And then there's the whole system of global governance, from climate summits to the G20, that just seems to be failing to cope structurally.
Right. So our mission today is to really get past the headlines and synthesize what's going on here.
Yes.
What mechanisms are under the greatest strain?
Yeah, we're going to trace the line from that high-stakes political chessboard like the stunning controversy over the proposed Ukraine peace deal.
All the way down to the front lines?
Down to the literal front lines where robots are now delivering supplies, and then back up to these, fractured global conference tables. We're really looking for the why behind all the chaos.
Okay, let's unpack this, and I think we have to start in Ukraine. The pressure to find an end to the conflict seems to have created, well, a diplomatic disaster.
A total disaster. And what's immediately fascinating is the complete incoherence it revealed in U.S. foreign policy.
What too?
You had key U.S. senators, Democrat Jeanne Shaheen, Republican Mike Rounds, and the independent Angus King, all stating clearly that Secretary of State Marco Rubio privately told them this proposal was, and I'm quoting here, a Russian wish list.
A wish list. So basically Russia's ideal terms.
Exactly. Shaheen called parts of it totally unacceptable, but then almost immediately the State Department comes out and insists the plan was fully authored by the United States.
Okay, wait. So why would the U.S. write a document that its own top diplomats are privately trashing as a capitulation to Russia?
That is the core geopolitical risk right there. Yeah. Policy incoherence. And the terms themselves, they reveal the problem, especially because the proposal was reportedly drafted without any input from Kyiv.
None at all.
None. And the key unacceptable terms, as they're being called, would apparently force Ukraine to surrender huge areas of territory. It would also severely limit the size of its armed forces from now on and, critically, permanently bar it from joining NATO.
It sounds less like a peace deal and more like demanding Ukraine institutionalize its own permanent vulnerability.
You've hit the nail on the head, and that's why Senator King was so forceful. He connected this proposal directly to the failed appeasement of Hitler in 1938.
He went there.
He did. He argued that sacrificing principles for, a temporary reprieve only invites more conflict down the road.
And all this was happening while President Trump was applying maximum pressure.
Maximum pressure. Trump said, okay, this isn't necessarily my final offer, but he gave Ukrainian President Zelensky a firm deadline.
Which was?
Until Thursday, November 27th, to approve it, or risk losing all American support. This was conveyed as a non-negotiable ultimatum by the Minister of the Army, Daniel Driscoll.
An ultimatum.
And Zelensky's public reaction, it just captured the impossible choice he was facing. He said he faced a serious dilemma, either loss of dignity or risk to lose a key ally.
The price of support is measured in land and sovereignty.
It appears so.
This volatility at the diplomatic table, where the old rules of alliance are being just torn up, it contrasts so sharply with the ground war itself. Let's pivot from that to the hyper-modern reality on the front lines.
Yeah, the sources detail a huge shift. We're talking about the mass use of robotics in eastern Ukraine.
So this is where human ingenuity is responding to political failure.
That's a great way to put it. In strategic sectors around Pokrovsk and Myrnograd, Russian forces are working relentlessly to cut off supply routes. And the key insight here is that this area has become a perfect kill zone.
A kill zone. What does that mean in practice?
It means sending in armored vehicles or even troops on foot is considered almost certain death.
So if no human can safely reach the combatants, how are they getting supplies? How are they evacuating the wounded?
By using the toy. That's what the 5th Brigade calls it. It's an unmanned ground vehicle, a UGV, or a land drone.
What does it look like?
Imagine a miniature tank, but with no turret. It's small enough to navigate a bicycle lane. We are literally seeing history being made in Pokrovsk. This might be the first conflict zone to rely almost entirely on mass UGV use.
And what makes them so much more effective than, say, the aerial drones we're always hearing about?
They're just harder to detect and harder to jam. It's the physics of their operation. Plus, they can carry significant weight. And the numbers, they're striking.
Let's hear them.
Ukrainian army officials confirmed that 90% of all supplies, ammunition, food, medical kits for the Pokrovsk front line are now delivered by these UGVs.
90%. They're a literal lifeline.
A literal life-saving lifeline, all operated remotely from safer locations.
That contrast is it's so essential to understanding this modern crisis.
Yeah.
Diplomatic processes are ancient and stalling, while battlefield technology is moving at warp speed.
And that theme, the struggle of these global systems to adapt, it carries over perfectly to global governance. Let's look at the chaotic conclusion of the UN Climate Summit, COP30, in Belém.
Right? The summit that dragged on for 24 hours late. I read reports suggesting the entire process very nearly collapsed.
It did. Veteran observers said afterwards that the Paris Agreement is now, quote, on life support. And while they did reach a fragile agreement in the end, it was completely insufficient to keep global heating below 1.5 degrees Celsius.
And the failures were specific.
Very specific. A huge finance shortfall for adaptation projects. And, get this, despite the summit being hosted deep in the Amazon, rainforest protection was barely even mentioned in the final document.
But the biggest failure, the one that connects right back to geopolitics, was the total capitulation on fossil fuels.
Precisely. Because of aggressive lobbying and the sheer economic power of gas, oil, and coal interests led very effectively by Saudi Arabia, the phrase fossil fuels was not mentioned a single time in the main agreement.
Not once. In a climate summit agreement in 2025.
Astounding, isn't it?
So we have to ask why the system was so pliable. The sources zero in on what they call 5 threats that plagued the talks. I think looking at those helps connect the dots of this global dysfunction.
It really does. Threat number 1, the global leadership vacuum. The U.S. walked out of the talks, and China, for all its size, failed to step up financially or politically.
And Trump's actions before the summit played a role.
A huge role. He had staged a very public summit with the Saudi crown prince just beforehand, which many observers believe emboldened Saudi Arabia to just push as hard as they could against any strong climate language at COP30.
So the lack of U.S. engagement was immediately exploited. What was the second threat?
Divided Brazil. The host nation itself was sending mixed messages. You had the environment secretary pushing for conservation, while the foreign ministry was simultaneously promoting agribusiness expansion.
And the third?
European parsimony. Basically, they were criticized for being stingy. They lagged on their promised climate finance, which was partly blamed on the rise of far-right parties at home, pulling resources and attention inward.
And the fourth threat was, I'm guessing, all the other crises sucking up the oxygen.
Absolutely. Global conflicts. Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan. They siphoned away funding overseas aid, get slashed to pay for rearming, and crucially, media attention.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, here's a shocking detail for you. Not one of the 4 major U.S. broadcast networks even sent a team to Belém.
If the media isn't there, the global pressure is just gone. And the fifth threat was the UN structure itself.
The rusty UN decision-making. The whole consensus model means any single low-ambition country can effectively veto any high-ambition decision.
Which is exactly what happened.
And it led to so much frustration that a group of high-ambition nations, led by Colombia, announced they're planning a parallel process to phase out fossil fuels. They've basically lost faith in the UN's ability to act quickly.
And that diplomatic friction just spilled right over into the G20 summit in South Africa.
Immediately. The U.S. boycotted the summit entirely, claiming persecution of the Afrikaner white minority in South Africa.
And that led to a pretty public spat.
Oh, yeah. South Africa publicly refused to hand over the G20 presidency to a, quote, junior U.S. official, calling it an insult to President Ramaphosa. It just shows a total collapse in diplomatic decorum.
And the final G20 declaration seemed to reflect priorities that directly conflicted with the U.S. and Argentina, right? President Mali skipped it entirely.
He did. South Africa issued the declaration early, and it focused heavily on climate change and global wealth inequality. But what's most revealing about the state of multilateralism is what it couldn't address. Ukraine. That 122-point G20 declaration made only one single generalized reference to the massive conflict raging there.
The central global conflict of the moment is reduced to a throwaway line. It just confirms that these big institutions are struggling.
And this upheaval is deeply internal as well. The sources show these profound political shifts happening, especially the acceleration toward the right in Eastern Europe.
Let's start in the Balkans. There was a presidential election in Republika Srpska, the Serb-run part of Bosnia.
Right, a historically volatile region. Its political structure is incredibly complex, all dating back to the U.S. brokered Dayton Peace Agreement that ended the 92-95 war.
And this election was happening because the main pro-Russian separatist leader, Milorad Dodik, was removed from office.
Correct. He was convicted and banned from holding office for disobeying the international official who oversees the peace deal, the High Representative.
Okay, for anyone who might not track Balkan politics closely, what does the High Representative actually do?
Think of the High Representative as the international peace supervisor. It's an appointed official with the power to veto laws and remove officials to make sure the peace accords are maintained.
So Dodik's removal by that body just underscores how fragile things still are.
Exactly. And the snap election now pits the Dodik-backed candidate, Karin, against the opposition's Blanusa.
Then moving over to Croatia, the sources highlight a resurgent far right that's creating a very aggressive climate.
The turning point seems to have been a massive open-air concert by the singer Marko Perkovic, who goes by Thompson. He's famous for these nationalistic songs, including one that uses the salute of the Nazi-era Ustasha regime for the homeland ready.
And the Prime Minister, Plenković, was seen there.
Photographed at the rehearsal, yes. And that concert, which drew 500,000 people, it just seemed to normalize and embolden these ultra-nationalist feelings.
And the impact.
It was immediate. There was an increase in the targeting of Croatian Serbs, violent disruptions of cultural events, masked individuals chanting fascist slogans in public. Plenković is being accused of complacency, of just letting it happen.
Okay, now let's shift focus from Europe to a severe ongoing security crisis in Africa, Nigeria. We're talking about a huge mass kidnapping.
One of the largest in recent memory. This is a crisis that commanded President Tinubu's immediate attention. More than 300 students and 12 teachers were abducted from St. Mary's School in Niger State.
And that was after another abduction.
Yes, it followed an earlier one where 25 girls were taken. The situation got so bad that President Tinubu had to cancel his international plans, including the G20, just to focus on the crisis. All the schools in the affected states are shut down.
And this all happened right around the time that President Trump was threatening military action over what he called the killing of Christians by radical Islamists in Nigeria. Do the motivations on the ground line up with that?
It's complex. A lot of these gangs are purely financially motivated. They want ransom money. But there is a growing concern among Nigerian authorities that these criminal groups are forming alliances, both tactical and maybe ideological, with jihadists from the Northeast.
So the kidnappings are a revenue source, but the insecurity is linked to something bigger.
A growing extremist footprint, yes.
Okay, before we close out this whole picture of global stress, there's one last domestic financial footnote that highlights volatility in a different way.
It's a striking contrast, for sure. While all this global chaos is unfolding, the sources report a major drop in Donald Trump's net worth. We're talking down $1.1 billion since September.
$1 billion? Yeah. From what?
It's primarily the volatility of Trump Media and Technology Group, or TMTG, the parent company of Truth Social. The company reported huge losses, partly from the fall in value of crypto assets, and the stock just tumbled.
So his political future is tied directly to a highly unstable digital asset.
It would seem so. But even as he took that massive hit to his net worth from his tech ventures, he was making very calculated, very stable moves elsewhere.
What kind of moves?
The sources contrast the chaos with his simultaneous purchase of at least $82 million worth of safe corporate and municipal bonds. We're talking shares in big established companies like Netflix, Boeing, and Meta.
So it's a strategic split. High-risk political and media exposure on one side, and strategic de-risking into stable assets on the other.
Exactly.
So if we pull all this together, what does this synthesis reveal? We've covered the fundamental incoherence of diplomacy in Ukraine. We've seen the systemic collapse of consensus at global climate summits. And we've tracked the rise of severe security crises and far-right political shifts.
The central idea that emerges is that the world's established infrastructure, whether it's the 80-year-old UN structure, diplomatic consensus, or the post-conflict architecture in the Balkans, it's all proving to be totally inadequate.
It's failing.
It's failing. And that inadequacy is forcing these radical ad hoc responses, whether they're political, like the parallel climate talks, or technological, like relying on UGVs just to keep your troops alive.
It seems like the old machinery is just too slow and too fragile for the speed and scale of modern geopolitical conflict.
Which raises a really important question for you, the listener, that connects our entire dive today. We see a conflict in Ukraine where human life is now being saved by small, unmanned machines running supplies through a kill zone. As military technology continues to dramatically outpace the speed and integrity of political dialogue, what is the future relationship between the human cost of conflict and the moral or diplomatic cost of using these increasingly autonomous tools? Should the technology saving lives on the battlefield force diplomacy to finally speed up? That's something for you to mull over.